Welcome to Target Market Insights, the multifamily and marketing podcast. Each week, John Kasman interviews multifamily and marketing experts to teach you how to find the best places to invest, attract investors, and grow your portfolio. You are listening to Target Market Insights with your host, John Kasman.
Welcome to Target Market Insights. I'm your host, John Kasman. And first and foremost, I got to say thank you for checking us out. Thank you for tuning in for today's episode. Now, if you've enjoyed this podcast, any episode or all the episodes, I need you to do me a favor and leave us a 5-star rating and review. It helps more people find the episodes and helps us reach a bigger audience. And bigger audience means better guests like the one we have today and more key insights to help you move your business forward. Now, today we're going to be talking to my man, Jimmy Murray. Jimmy is a millennial real estate investor, which allowed him to become a corporate dropout by 28. Now, he runs a 7-figure property management company out of Rhode Island, and he is the co-host of the Cashflow Kings podcast. Let's welcome to the show, Jimmy Murray.
Awesome. Excited to be here today and really excited to share a couple of stories that I have.
Jimmy, Mr. Cashflow King himself, man, listen, good to have you on the show. I believe, I'm pretty confident that you are a first investor that we're talking to out of Rhode Island. So excited to talk to you a little bit more about the East Coast and kind of what you have going on there. But in your bio, we talked about you dropping out of kind of the corporate world at 28. Talk to me about, what led you into real estate and kind of through that process to drop out at such a young age.
Yeah. So honestly, it was always in the back of my mind, right? So when I went and got a degree in college, I got a degree in finance. The game plan was to go to Wall Street, make a ton of money, and then move that into real estate to generate passive income. Never officially made it to Wall Street, although I did interview at Goldman Sachs at one point. That was really cool because I was a young kid in this multi-million-dollar building, probably $1 billion building. Ended up coming home working for a financial firm. During the course of that first year, I studied for the Chartered Financial Analyst exam, and I scored in the top 10% of the failures. I spent 6 months, every waking hour outside of working, studying for this exam, and I failed. But that provided...
I'm sorry, hold up. Did you say you scored in the top 10% of the failures?
That's it. So I was like right on the cusp.
What does that mean? That you were close to passing?
That's it.
Okay.
Yeah, so
out of the
stats.
People who didn't pass, you were in that top group.
That's it. It's like sticking it in your eye a little bit, right? Hey, you were right there. You were right there. Try again. That provided a great pivot point for me, though, to try and figure out what I really wanted to do. Do I take another $5,000 and invest it in this test and the study courses and all the other materials I needed to be successful to actually pass it a second time? Or did I take that capital and invest in real estate? So I actually happened to find a mentor, and he said, hey, listen, I think that you should start investing in real estate. It's a great time. So this is in 2012. And I have no idea how good the market is now. I know that the economy is on the rebound after the financial crisis, but honestly, I didn't know how lucky I was. So at that point, I took my money and I bought my first 4-family in Pawtucket, Rhode Island. But I don't know, it was always something in me that I was interested in real estate. My dad had invested in real estate at one point and failed. He ended up going back to the union as a union carpenter, started in the union, went on his own, failed with some investments, and then moved back into the union. So he was against it from the jump. And he actually told me, he's like, listen, I know you're really intelligent. I don't see you succeeding with this. And now fast forward 6-7 years later, and we built a pretty cool portfolio at Lyon in terms of things that we manage. And then I still have a small portfolio because I've been focused more on building the property management business.
Well, I love it. What does your dad say to you now?
So this was cool. So looking back on that feedback, it's really tough because my dad was like the original mentor, always coached me growing up playing baseball. I know it sounds kind of cliche, but I always leaned on him to give me the advice that I needed to get me where I wanted to go. And this was a big turning point. This was the first time that he said, I don't think you're going to be able to be successful with this. Stick to working at your financial job and stick to making money there. This is not something you should do. A couple months ago, he called me out of the blue. My dad doesn't really call me, but I'll go and I'll visit him. And he said, hey, looking back, you were meant to be exactly where you are right now. And I'm like, what do you mean? He goes, well, I can remember in high school, you like started a car detailing business, or you started this, or you tried this, and you kept pivoting. Like you would fail here, learn this, move here. And he goes, I know that you always had a knack for real estate. I told you not to pick up a hammer because with him being a carpenter, he wanted me to stay to the books and kind of stay on the ownership side. But he said, and my dad throws around compliments like he's able to throw around sewer caps. Like it doesn't happen, right? And he said, it's impressive where you've been able to go. And I'm glad you didn't take my advice.
Wow, that's remarkable. That's
So
remarkable.
I think that's a really good point, though, in the sense that, I mean, having mentors is great, but at the end of the day, you still have to believe in yourself, right? That's just like one opinion that you can take into account. But if you have that belief in yourself, you can achieve anything you want.
I'll say too, when you think about it, our family members in particular, they are looking out for us, right? They want
Yep.
us to be happy, healthy, safe. They want to protect us. And if
Yep.
they failed or they've seen that play for them not work out, they want to protect you from making those same mistakes. And I think
Yep.
ultimately, as adults, as human beings, we want to listen to them, but it's on us to understand, you know, what we need to do to be successful. And I would say too, I had a lot of conversations with people starting out, as I'm sure many of our listeners, where there were people who tried to persuade you from investing, telling
Yeah.
you about the pitfalls and the perils and everything that can go wrong. And I would say people will always tell you what not to do because it didn't work for them. Don't let them project that on you. Don't let their failures project on you. What I will say though is it's a great opportunity to come back with a question to say, well, what didn't work? Learn
Right.
from their mistakes. What is it that didn't work? Why did it not work for you? And understand how do you, if that's an obstacle that you may face, how do you overcome that obstacle? Because we're always going to face these obstacles. But if someone that has gone through it, they may just say it doesn't work. Well, we know it works. We know that there are people like you and I sitting here talking on the show. There were hundreds, if not thousands, if not tens of thousands of successful investors who've talked about how real estate has changed their lives, how it has given them financial freedom, how it has empowered them to live the life of their dreams. So we know it works. But what you do or the decisions you make or the way you implement a strategy may not work. So the best thing you can do is learn from these mistakes and grow and implement it. And I'm glad you were able to do that and obviously not listening to your father. And as a man who has a father who doesn't give compliments as well, I know what it feels like to finally get that attaboy. So, right.
I hear that. So piggybacking on what you said, I think that learning or having people in your life that have failed at certain things and being able to learn from them is a lot of times a better tool than learning from someone who has had success. I mean, maybe not off the bat, but if you hear a story of someone who failed, at least now you have that story in your head, and now you can start to think through how you can work past it in the future if you experience that. So I think that's huge. The second point that I want to make, kind of what you talked about earlier, a lot of times when you start out in business or in anything that you do, strangers have to believe in you first. But the really cool part is when your family starts believing in you. But a lot of times that takes a while to happen. And it probably took me like 4 or 5 years. It's not a quick process. So push through and work through it. But that belief in yourself is going to help you out tremendously.
Yeah, Jimmy, I think that's a great point about strangers believing in you first. I when I started raising capital for our first deals, they tell you start with friends and family. Well, we had
Yep.
built a small portfolio ourselves, so it wasn't like we just came out of the blue. We had
Right.
a pretty good portfolio. Nonetheless, when it came to raising capital from other investors, I was, a little nervous going into the process. I had a mentor and he kind of helped coach me and help me understand what to expect and what to go through. But I think nonetheless, a lot of people in my circle, they just didn't know enough about real estate. They were very apprehensive. And it was more of a, why don't you do it first at a larger scale and then show me that, and then I may be open to it. And it actually amazed me on our first deal. We had a couple of close friends who invested with us and family members, but the majority of the people who invested were people who I met after I made the decision to start investing in larger deals and starting to raise capital for deals. And to that point, I think that helps to build the self-esteem, build the confidence, and allows you to kind of propel forward. And then coming back to those other people that you know in your life and saying, hey, look, I told you this is what I was going to do. I'm doing it. We're having a great success. When you're ready, let's talk again. So you can still come back and have those conversations. But the point is, if you have an idea, whether it's real estate or not real estate, but if you're looking to get the buy off from other folks, whether they're from an investment standpoint or you just want their support, sometimes you're not going to get it right away, and you have to be okay with that, and you have to keep pushing forward. But if you pivot and look broader, there are other folks who may completely believe in you and see the valleys and the upsides you bring to the table. I don't want to get really religious, but there's a quote in the Bible, and I don't know it exactly, but it basically talks about when Jesus was in his hometown, that people really didn't recognize him. They didn't believe him, and he went away and he did these miracles. And when he came back home, they said, well, Jesus, how come you didn't do that stuff here? He's like, because you don't see me as Jesus. You see me as the kid who grew up next to you. So you don't believe in me the same way. And there's a quote me and my brother used to share back and forth. So I forgot the exact quote, but the point is that the people you grow up with, the people you know, the people you've worked with, they see you in a certain light. Mom sees you as her little boy. Your best friend sees you as the guy you used to go drink with, after school. But someone who has a clean slate, they can see you for the real expertise you have in a subject matter, and the value that you bring to the table, where some of these other folks may not see it right away. So you really have to demonstrate it and work a little bit harder to win over those folks who know you pretty well. So great point there that you brought up. I want to talk about Rhode Island, though, when you get a second. I want to talk about Rhode Island and the market there.
You get it. I love how you tied that into a Bible quote. I had chills. I am fairly religious as well. So that was a great tie-in. Rhode Island, though. So a lot of people, I went to college in Ohio. And I can remember
man in my heart. Where did you go to school?
I went to Ohio State, or the Ohio State.
There you go. There's my guy. There's my guy.
I love it. I love it. But
all my Michigan listeners just tuned out and just left.
Hey, when they win a rivalry game, they can come back, right?
Right.
It's been a long time, but I can remember going to catch a Cincinnati Reds game, and a guy's like, you don't talk right. Where are you from? And I said, Rhode Island. He goes, oh yeah, part of New York. And I'm like, no, not like Long Island, Rhode Island. It's the smallest state. Like, I feel like when you go through grade school geography class, like you should remember like Alaska, the biggest state, and then Rhode Island, the smallest state, but maybe you missed that day. So I get that a lot. Other Rhode Islanders get that a lot. And then also it's the way that we say it. It's not like Rhode Island. We kind of pronounce it Rhode Island. It's like one word together. Kind of like how we stop at stop signs. This is a Rhode Island stop. You just kind of roll through. You don't necessarily stop. So Rhode Island's a great submarket outside of Boston. So typically, railing this back to real estate, this late stage of the cycle, as yields start to decrease in the Boston market, you see investors essentially, I'm trying to think of the word that I want to use. I was going to use matriculate, but work their way down from Boston to start investing in some of the markets closer to Rhode Island. So whether that be southeastern Massachusetts or Providence or Pawtucket, Rhode Island, I'm trying to pause on my accent there. They're great markets to invest in, but now we're starting to see our rates of return decrease as well as the larger amounts of capital start to move down from Boston.
Yeah, I think we're seeing that in a lot of markets, probably across the country, where you have those major metros that are seeing great growth. And as investors chase yield, they're expanding. And it's not necessarily that they're changing complete markets, but they're looking at other sub-markets. And, maybe they're looking in Boston, the Boston MSA, and now they're looking more in Rhode Island. But we're seeing it in a lot of places there. Where have you, as far as before some of that was taking place, where were you focused, and then how have you pivoted in response to what the market is doing from a sub-market perspective?
Yeah, so our biggest thing is, at the end of the day, I'm like Warren Buffett. I want to buy and hold forever. I want that cash flow, kind of piggybacking on the name of our podcast, the Cashflow Kings. Like, that's what we're very focused on. This year, my purchases have been multifamily flips. for a couple of reasons. Like Bigger Pockets has made the idea of house hacking really sexy, right? So you have a lot of these younger folks coming out of college house hacking, and these are investments that work for them, but as an investor, they don't necessarily work for what I'm looking for. So we've been buying 3 and 4 family properties, and we've been flipping them. We'll negotiate with a wholesaler on the front end, get it under contract, close at a good price point, and then sell via the comparables approach. So not necessarily net operating income, but the target, what we typically do is if it's a 3-family property, we'll go through, increase all the rents. If someone leaves, we'll rehab the unit. We always leave 1 unit unoccupied so that we can appeal to that owner-occupied borrower so that we can get that essentially the highest possible offer on the back end.
What's your time frame? Is that a 6-month thing, 1 year, 2 year? How long are you holding the properties?
The target is 6 to 8 months. So we have great access to capital where we've got a hard money lender that'll fund us 100% of purchase and of rehab. And then we've just got to pay the holding cost. Yeah, right? Like, great scenario. But I guess that really just goes back to work ethic too. Like 2 years ago, I didn't have access to that. But we continue to put in the work with my property management company, and we earned a certain street cred. So they know that when we show up and we purchase a property, we're going to take care of the tenants in the right ways, but we're also going to take care of our property. So that's why we gain access to that capital. If you don't do the right things, you're not going to continue to build that street cred to have more and more access to the things that you desire.
Love it, man. Great tips there. What would you say are some of the things you did to build that street credibility, especially to the point where you're able to attract better terms, better financing? What are some key steps that you implemented over the last couple of years to get your business to the point where you could get better capital?
Yeah, so it all starts with networking, right? So you want to network to attract the right clients. And that really started at my local RIA group. So I think RIA groups are pivotal to most folks' success. Our local RIA group, it's $100 for the first year and $60 every year thereafter. It is super cheap, and you can network with some of the top investors in the area. That is going to be critical. From there, at one point, one of the heads of the RIA group, he said, "Hey, you work with a lot of investors in here." And my comment back, and this may sound a little bit cocky, but I can recite Jay-Z is, "I'm not cocky, I'm confident. When you tell me I'm the best, it's a compliment," right?
Yeah.
So I told him, I said, I work with the investors that I want to work with. I think it's really important to work with like-minded investors. And on the flip side of that, if you are an investor, you want to work with a like-minded property manager. That property manager is essentially an additional partner on your team. So when we attract those investors that we want to work with from the RIA, we then start to generate trust in managing their asset. So a lot of my conversations up front with the investors are trying to figure out what they want to do with the property. Is it stable? Can we increase rents? What's the rate of return you're looking for? Are we going to stabilize it and then you want to sell it so you can exchange it into something else? But it's understanding that broader investment and where they want to take it, right? Do they want to buy other things? And when you gain that trust, now they're going to start to look to us. Hey, do you know any wholesalers that have properties? Can you help me find another property on MLS? Oh, by the way, I'm selling these properties. I appreciate that you're a good property manager. I just don't have the chops to be a landlord. If they bought in like a C or D neighborhood, chasing that higher return. Hey, by the way, when I sell these properties, I'm going to have X number of dollars and I'm going to give you carte blanche to buy whatever you want. So it's really waking up every day and doing the things that you say you're going to do.
Yeah. And you say when they're selling those properties, are they buying a property for themselves and bringing you on as a property manager, or are they looking to partner with you in a different aspect?
It can be both. It can be both. So we have a client out in Fall River right now, and he's selling his 2 6-families, and he's going to walk away with, 6-figure gain, probably like mid 6 figures from both 6 families. And he said, "Hey, listen, I've had my run as a landlord. It's just not something I'm interested in. But by the way, I'm willing to partner with you guys." So my company's called Lyon Property Management. He said, "I'll let Lyon manage it, and then we'll create some type of ownership structure. I'll bring the capital. You guys do the rest, and just cut me a check on a month-to-month basis, and we're good to go." Other investors, our portfolio is really split. So like the other half of the portfolio, a lot of guys are 1031 exchanging. So rather than, it's really a strategy of more doors and less roofs. So rather than having 3 3-families, they're going to have 1 10-family, right? So that's really the focus at this late stage of the cycle for these folks. And a lot of them are also trying to upgrade neighborhood, right? So if they're in like a B or a C neighborhood, can we upgrade them to an A or a B? Yeah, it's going to be more expensive per door at a lower rate of return, but hopefully they got that bump from the run in the market where they have stored value in that asset that they're selling, and they can exchange it into the next asset.
And what's the benefit, or what's the reason that they're looking to bump up neighborhoods?
Yeah, less headaches, more stable cash flow, right? So from a property manager's perspective, we have a very tight process related to payment. So Rhode Island is, I would say, pretty soft on tenants in terms of when we can start the eviction process, but the process is the process. Some of these owners, they'll buy that C or that D asset and not factor in eviction costs in the pro forma. But in those type of demographics, it happens much more frequently. I'm not telling you that you'll never evict a tenant from an A or B style property, but it's going to happen a lot more. It's going to be a lot more prevalent in that C and D demographic. So what they're looking for is to mitigate some of that risk going forward.
Yeah, and Jimmy, I want to push you a little bit here because I think this is an important topic, especially for a newer investor, right? The people were these are investors who have hired a property manager, right? So
Correct.
It's not like they're the ones, banging on the door trying to collect, but they are still the ones who are saying, hey, I want to upgrade from maybe the C class asset or D class asset up to a B or C asset, right? So they're the ones who are saying they want to do that. You're saying part of it is a collections issue. And a lot of times those pro formas, they always look better on a C or D property than an A or B property. What are you seeing as far as the actuals over a period of time when you do have evictions and things like that come into play?
Yeah, so I would say, well, I guess it really depends on where it's at. I'm going to actually sidestep that question for a second because I thought about something additional as you're kind of talking. I think the other thing is, I think like the A and B demographic are probably going to be more stable in the event of an economic downturn as well. You're going to have more highly skilled labor that'll probably be renting in those neighborhoods, so they may not be as impacted as the folks in that lower demographic. But in terms of evictions, so I think there's two major places to pay attention there, and one may play into kind of the makeup of the units, the unit mix. And I know in syndications you probably come across this a lot more, but in terms of unit mix, if you have 1 bedrooms, you're probably going to be placing a tenant like every year or two, right? But if you have 3-bedroom units or larger units, those are going to be more family-oriented multifamilies, and they're probably going to stay 3, 4, 5 years at a time as long as you're providing what you need to as a landlord. So I think that's one part of the pro forma that you need to pay attention to as well. On the eviction front, I think it's really specific. In the D neighborhoods, there's some great programs that you can work with. It doesn't necessarily have to be Section 8, but that can help stabilize cash flow as well and maybe get some of that eviction protection there. We've been able to leverage some programs in our local area, and that's really helped investors have more of an appetite to invest in those areas. And there's a little bit of goodwill associated with that as well. Sometimes you're able to give folks a second chance and help them get back on their feet, and that's a hell of a story. I'm a big believer in second chances.
No, it's awesome. I love that. All right, let's talk a little bit more about kind of what you're doing with the Cashflow Kings, right? So we've talked a little about Rhode Island, how you got into it. Actually, before we go into the Cashflow Kings, we kind of skipped over the property management side, right? Because you talked about when you left corporate America, you bought that 4-unit building. We didn't really talk about how you started managing properties for other investors. What kind of led you into that lane as opposed to continuing to grow your own personal portfolio?
I caught a bad review in corporate America. So I had this really tough manager. And when I started that role, so as a financial analyst, it sounds really sexy, but it's not. It's trying to make sure that people don't spend too much money, right? So I used to have to build this 50-page PowerPoint deck to present to the CFO on a monthly basis. And I came in my first 2 weeks and I automated the entire process. So I had the data feeds feed into Excel, which fed into PowerPoint, and it was done. And I'm somewhat savvy. I'm not that savvy, but it was a pretty easy process. She didn't really like that. So I don't know if anyone's ever read the 48 Laws of Power, but it might even be the first rule. I think the first rule is don't outshine the master. And in that scenario, I did that, but it wasn't to outplay anybody. I felt like that was my job to come in and crush it. right? As a manager myself, I always think about, I want to bring in folks that are way smarter than I am so that we can all achieve a higher level of success. So from there, it was kind of downhill, but I had a review and she did not let me get in a word, told me how average I was, and it didn't work out. I walked back to my cubicle and I texted my now partner, Chris, and said, we're launching a property management company. He said, let's grab a beer first. And I'm like, no, we're launching this and we can grab a beer to see if you want to be involved. So from there, it's really history. But it was a slow grind trying to attract clients. And honestly, the first client was a friend of Chris's. He had a 3-family in Providence in, I would say, like a C- neighborhood. And it was a rough go of it on that first property. The biggest turning point for us, I'm a huge believer in visualization. And I started watching Conor McGregor's Rise. And I learned that at one point, his now wife, Dee, gave him the book The Secret by Rhonda Byrne. So I went on Amazon, and honestly, I'm a very avid reader, and I always have to get the hard copy of the book. This is the first book that I bought on CD, and I bought 2 of them, one for me and one for my partner, Chris. And when we started buying in, started visualizing and saying, hey, listen, we're picking up these like single families and 2s and 3s. Hey, we want like 5 to 10 unit buildings. All of a sudden, the business just turned because we started to really visualize what we wanted and where we wanted to go. And that was pivotal to where we were headed.
No, I love it. Thank you for clarifying that. That's great to hear. All right, let's talk about Cashflow Kings. You launched this podcast a little more than a year ago. You're seeing great growth with it. You're talking and you're sharing tips on how to create cash flow for other investors. What sparked you to launch Cashflow Kings?
You're gonna love this. I think I'll get a smile out of you here. I'm gonna go back to my corporate role. So part of my visualization of growing Lyon was also leaving my corporate job, and it took about 1.5 years. But I used to walk the halls, and I used to think about writing this killer exit email to the lyrics of Notorious B.I.G, his song "Juicy," right? So I did, and to this day, like I bumped into one of my old colleagues at Home Depot 2.5 years later. He's like, "Dude, people still talk about that email that you sent." But the gist of that email was, I want to show people there's hope. Like if you have that side hustle and you want to break out of the corporate grind, you can get there. So it was kind of like, hey guys, this is how I did it, which middle level management did not appreciate.
Oh, I can't imagine it like that at all.
But even in my, I'm in my corporate office, not even corporate office, I'll call it like, I don't know, my office building now, but at home, I have that email on my wall to remind myself why I wake up and work so hard every day. But that's,
do you remember the words to it?
To most of it. It was a pretty long email. It's like 2 pages on the wall.
Right. Here's what I want you to do. I'm dead serious. I want you to send me a copy of it. We're going to link to it.
I can do that.
All right.
I can do that. That's awesome. I love that. I'm actually writing that down as we sit here. But I think that's really the basis of the Cashflow Kings in terms of giving back and showing people that there's a way out, right? I think that too many people get stuck and they don't have a way. And I think that's where a podcast can really help people out. It doesn't just have to be the Cashflow Kings. It could be this podcast or any other podcast that you listen to. But it's amazing the world that we live in today and how much information you can get for free online to really help you on that journey. So help you when your family doesn't believe in you and help you before those strangers start believing you and lead you down the path that you want to head down. The other big thing from the Cashflow Kings is we realized that a podcast could gain access to more deals. So not only help people out, but it's kind of like that law of reciprocity in the universe, right? So if you give to the universe, it's gonna come back to you, and we're huge believers in that. And that's like another tenet of The Secret. Even today, like after we record this podcast, it's Christmas time, and I've had a great year. So we're actually going to go to a local neighborhood organization and make a donation. So that's really key for us.
It's awesome, man. I love it. So what's been the best thing about the Cashflow Kings podcast for you?
So this is kind of cool. I don't know how people feel about this, but I've become like a little bit of a local celebrity. It's cool to have people look up to you. I'm typically like a pretty humble guy, and I feel that I've had a level of success, and sometimes I don't believe in as much of myself as some of these other folks do. And honestly, I find a lot of motivation in that. Like when people come up to me and they're like, "Hey, I saw you do this last week. Like that really helped me out." I'm like, oh man, that's cool. Like that happened on a day I wasn't having that great of a day, but that really motivates me that I was able to help you guys out. And I think it goes back and forth, right? Like we can leverage the podcast to help motivate other folks. And then those days when we need that pick me up, I'll get that random DM of like, hey Jimmy, you said this last week and that really helped me when I was looking at this property or whatever else it was. And it's just that law of the universe, like the reciprocity of everything kind of coming full circle.
No, I love it, man. Thank you for sharing that. So let's talk a little bit more about just, as you look with investors, as you're partnering with individuals, as you're looking at the market right now, what are mistakes you're seeing investors make?
Using the 1% rule. I hate the 1% rule. And Frank gives me such a hard time about this. So for those of you that aren't familiar with the 1% rule, when you're looking at a multifamily property, the 1% rule only looks at the rent roll. And I think that's the worst thing that you can do because buildings are all very different. And you have to look at the expense side of things as well. So like first rip, looking at the 1% rule, if you have two buildings that have the same exact cash flow, but one building includes utilities and one does not, the outcome of both of those properties is going to be dramatically different, where one may work out if you're not including utilities, but if you are, that 1% rule may put you in a really tough scenario. So another thing that the internet has made very popular, and I just do not believe in that rule. I would say dive into the pro forma and really dive into the expenses and the revenue and where you can build that property and pay attention to that broader pro forma and not just that one rule of thumb.
Yeah, I think that's the challenge with those rules of thumb, right? They're great for you to start getting a general sense, but you should absolutely not make a buying decision because a property passed any rule of thumb. I don't care if it's the 1% rule, the 2% rule, or any other, shorthand. I mean, those are really ways for you to dig deeper to say, oh,
Right.
okay, well, hey, this looks pretty close. Maybe we should investigate more to see if this is a deal and not just use one of those rules to make a decision. And there's a lot of things too. I mean, to your point, the expense ratio can change drastically based on various factors. You mentioned the expenses. If the expenses are included, then that's one thing versus if they're not included. The age of a building, that's going to play a role. The older the building, the higher you can expect the maintenance, repairs, and the overall expenses to be. Insurance is probably going to be higher. So you have a lot of different costs like that you need to factor in, as opposed to simply just looking at the numbers and saying, okay, this one passes this rule and this one doesn't. I'm not going to go with that one. So just definitely make sure you understand that. And then not to mention the appreciation potential, as you talked about. Investors looking in more A-class neighborhoods or B-class neighborhoods. Part of the benefit of those areas is that they have the ability to appreciate because they can attract more individuals. There's higher demand, and they're, especially the B-class areas, they're more recession-proof because you can have, A-class people who are looking to maybe move down. You have C-class people who are maybe looking to move up, and you have that variance there. So you want to factor in all those different things. So it's really hard to just give you like a rule of thumb to run with and you should buy based off of this. You kind of do have to factor in a lot of these different inputs and then make a solid decision based off of that. And I would say too, you definitely want to make sure you understand what the property is doing when you buy it and not just speculating on what the future could be. I think I see a lot of people doing that and making mistakes where they're speculating big time on what the future could be without kind of a clear, proven plan as far as what they can do to the property to improve the quality or improve the NOI.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. We're going to jump into our bullseye round. Jimmy, you ready?
Yes. Let's go.
What's a failure or an apparent failure that sets you up for later success?
That's a good one. Wow. I'm like blanking right now. Normally I'm a lot better at this stuff. I think the biggest thing that set me up for failure, I talked about it a little bit earlier. I thought that I want to be a stock picker, which meant I had to take that chartered financial analyst exam, and I spent a ton of money when honestly I didn't have it. My student loans at that point were a mortgage payment. And that really made me think about what I want to do with my life and where I want to head. A lot of people may have given up at that point, but I stuck with it when I figured out what I really want to do.
What's the book you've gifted or recommended the most in the last year?
Yeah, so that shifted. I read the most amazing book this year, and I can't believe I haven't read it sooner. It's called The Wealthy Gardener. The Wealthy Gardener is a book. So that's the face a lot of people make. Like it's surprising no one has heard of this book. I used to always recommend The Richest Man in Babylon. That was my favorite book before The Wealthy Gardener, just to give you perspective. The Wealthy Gardener is like a synopsis of probably like 20 great books that I've read. It's a little bit longer. It's 450 pages, but it is totally worthwhile.
All right, The Wealthy Gardener. We'll check that out. All right, give me a digital or mobile resource you recommend for your business.
Yeah, so mobile resource, something that we use today, and I think it can help out a lot of DIY landlords. It's called Z Inspector. For the DIY landlord, it's free. For the property manager that needs a really robust system, I think it's like $70 a month. It makes move-in and move-out condition statements super, super easy. And if you buy a special camera, you can also do like 360-degree tours. So you don't need like that fancy, I'm blanking on the name. You don't need that fancy camera that I think Google probably owns the company now. You can just get a $300 camera to do 360-degree tours, and that can really set you apart as a DIY landlord.
What's a daily habit that helps you stay focused on your goals?
Yeah, affirmations. So I'm huge. I have this book. I leave it on my kitchen table, and I write down 25 affirmations every day. I would say day to day, it's mostly the same, but I do tweak it from time to time if I feel that, I need to change the way that I'm setting up my mind for the day. But generally, it stays pretty static day to day.
What's one thing you know now that you wish you knew when you were starting out?
Yeah, so this is something tough that I've struggled with, and it's not every client in property management is a good client. Not every client is a right fit for our company. In the beginning, when you launch a business, you want to take on everything and be everything to everyone, and that's really not where you want to be, and that's not what you want to do. In the beginning, you may have to do it so you can stabilize that cash flow, but once you reach a certain point, you want to make sure that you're building your company in the right direction and working with the right clients. That took me so long to learn.
What's one thing you know now that you wish you knew 12 months ago?
12 months ago. Let's see. I'm trying to think. So this is really cool because it's funny that you say this. I've recorded a few different podcasts, but it's interesting. I start listening back to these other ones. I'm like, oh, that's what I was thinking, or this is what I was doing during that time frame. I think the biggest thing 12 months ago is recognizing the move to property where it would almost kill my company in 2019. So we talked software packages before. Propertyware is a property management software. Not a huge fan. I thought it was going to change our business for the best. We're actually headed back to work with the Appfolio. So really excited for that.
Yeah, that sounds like it was a big change and didn't work out. And now you're flipping back to Appfolio where you were at. So definitely a good thing to know, or wish you knew a year ago.
Yeah.
What advice would you give to a smart-driven college student about the real world?
Continue to work and build your network. I don't know if anyone's familiar with the Myers-Briggs personality test. I am an INTJ. They call that the architect mindset. But the first letter in that 4-letter series, I stands for introvert. I don't like to talk to people. If I could crunch numbers in a spreadsheet all day, that's cool. Like, I have fun with that. But coming out of college, I didn't network as strong as I should have. There are a lot of real people out there, and I feel like most people are introverted. But most people will sit down and have a cup of coffee with you, and I think that's really important. Don't shy away from reaching out to people who have achieved a level of success that you want to achieve, saying, hey, they're too big for me, or they don't want to talk to me. Reach out, see if they want to grab a cup of coffee, because a lot of times those young kids come out of college, you reach out to someone who's older or more experienced, and they appreciate the value of trying to get back to someone where they once were. So I think it's really important to reach out, try to find that mentor, have a cup of coffee, lunch with someone who you'd like to emulate.
No, great tips there. Exactly. What are you curious about right now?
That's a good question. I'm curious about getting back into the wholesale game. So we talked a little bit before the podcast about how we're going to try and shift our management company to have a wholesale arm where we can funnel deals back into our own portfolio as well as our clients, so we can all achieve a higher level of financial freedom. I haven't wholesaled in maybe like 3 or 4 years. I have bought wholesale deals. And it's really interesting, the marketing that some of these guys are doing. I was on a phone call yesterday where there's a company that legitimately only runs Facebook ads. And he launched a campaign for a gentleman where the gentleman spent $200 and he gets 60 wholesale leads. So I thought that was really cool. I never thought that Facebook marketing could be as critical to success in wholesaling. So I'm really excited to get back into that area and see what some of these wholesalers have been doing.
All right. So I know you're out in Rhode Island, which is a little different than Long Island.
Yes.
But give me the best place to grab a bite out there.
Yeah, so I think you're gonna go with I'm gonna go with Oneyville, New York system. So it's like hot wieners. They're like hot dogs, and you get the essentially like chili sauce on them. But like the staple Rhode Island dish, if I were to think about it, you get three. They call it 3 all the way. So onions, mustard, celery salt on the hot wieners, with a bag of chips and a coffee milk. Coffee milk is like the Rhode Island drink. A lot of people don't know that. It's not mixing like a cup of coffee with a glass of milk. It's kind of like coffee. I don't know if you guys even have coffee ice cream, but coffee milk is the go-to drink here. So I would check that out.
Yeah. Okay. So let's just take a quick detour. Tell me more about coffee milk. What exactly is that?
So I would say it's similar to like if you make chocolate milk, and it's not like Nesquik. It's more of a liquid, but you put it in before you pour the milk and it kind of stirs itself. And I have a son, he's 3, and he is obsessed. He only drinks coffee milk right now. So proud that he's a
You give your 3-year-old coffee milk?
Yes, from time to time. He loves it. I try to get him more water and apple juice, but he is obsessed with coffee milk. Always asking me for it.
All right.
It's not like caffeine. It's more like chocolate milk, just a little bit of a different flavor.
Yeah, like a coffee flavor, probably.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Sounds good. Well, listen, Jimmy, this has been a good conversation, even excluding the coffee milk thing, which I'm guessing is just really big out there, the East Coast. But for our listeners who want to get in touch with you, check out the Cashflow Kings podcast and learn more about what you're doing. How can they get in touch?
Definitely. So check us out on Instagram. We provide daily advice and insight into what we're doing on a day-to-day basis. And the handle on Instagram is the Cashflow Kings.
Love it. Love it. Well, thank you, Jimmy, for coming on the show today. Really appreciate you sharing your story, the hardships you faced starting out, really making that decision to say, you know what, we're just going to launch this property management company against kind of your dad's objections and the other pushback that you received. Really understanding how you were able to grow, really leveraging RIA meetings to build your connections, build your clientele, and then also you start getting better financing for deals so you can really explode your portfolio and just really focusing on then, helping other people through the Cashflow Kings podcast and your Instagram account, sharing more information and giving that back to the people. I don't know if this coffee milk is available across the U.S., but maybe I'll check it out. Yeah.
I'll send you a link.
There we go. We'll check out some coffee milk, man. I'm game to try it. If your 3-year-old is drinking it, it must not have that much caffeine in it. So I will definitely be willing to try it out and see. Well, listen, Jimmy, you take care, man. It's good to have you on the show today.
Thank you.